going to be how I got involved in the whole professional wrestling scene. Had to be mid-70s. I was a big roller derby fan. And I don't know if anybody out there remembers roller derby, you know, the tracks and things and people skating and smashing into each other and all that good stuff. But anyway, roller derby ended abruptly for some reason. Never was any rhyme or reason that I could have found out. But in the interim, I'm in a bar on a Saturday night, and it's around 11:30, and everybody's watching harness racing from Yonkers because I hung out with a bunch of invertebrate gamblers at the time. So harness racing from Yonkers ends, and all of a sudden we have championship wrestling. Now, this was the WWWF, Worldwide Wrestling Federation. And here is this guy with a bald head, the rest of his body completely covered with hair, snarling and yelling what he's going to do to Bruno at Madison Square Garden. Okay, then Bruno comes on and gives his interview as a gentleman, more subdued and things like that. So we decide we got to go see this damn thing. So I go buy tickets at Madison Square Garden. We get halfway decent seats. It's always was a super card over there. And of course, you know, the main event was George the Animal Steele versus Bruno Sammartino. So there was other matches. There was the Blackjack Mulligan and Blackjack Lanza against Tony Gurria and Dean Ho. The Valiant brothers were there. Andre the Giant was there against Paul the Butcher Vachon. And then, of course, as we got to the end of the card, there was a curfew in New York City at 11 o'clock. So this was about 20-25 minutes before the curfew was going to end. It was George Steele against Bruno Sammartino, and Bruno was the WWWF champion at the time. And the Garden made a disclaimer that Madison Square Garden is not responsible for the actions of George the Animal Steele. Well, the match was everything you wanted it to be. They were brawling out of the ring, in the ring, all over the place. Bruno clobbered Steele with a metal chair, which drew blood. The match ended either in a count-out or a disqualification or something, but I found out later on that most of the matches back then were set up to go maybe 2 or 3 main events. Of course, being that this was a count-out, there would be another match next month, maybe in a steel cage to prevent, you know, George from rolling out of the ring. All right, cool. So we leave. We're standing on the corner of 34th Street and I believe it was 8th Avenue at the time, right outside the Garden. And we're heading back to my watering hole, Club 44 on 44th Street, when all of a sudden this cab comes blasting by with a crowd of people chasing it. And we're like, wow, somebody must have really fucked up. Well, I found out later on that in the cab was George Steele and Blackjack Lanza, and Bruno's fans recognized Steele and were chasing the cab. Reading George's book and having interviewed George myself, George said basically they had to rear-end the garbage truck in front of them because the fans were trying to turn the cab over. If they had turned the cab over, they would have probably killed George and Blackjack. Yeah, they believed the shit back then. I mean, you know, not to say it was shit, but there was kayfabe back then. Nobody knew, nobody exposed the business. Everything was real. Having talked to George, you know, he wrestled Bruno many times, and he says, you know, Bruno and me didn't screw around sometimes. Sometimes we actually hit each other. And Fred Blassie, in an interview, said, you know, when the State Athletic Commission was present, we hit each other. You know, his exact words were, fuck those cocksuckers, we didn't tell them anything. The good guys, which were known as the baby faces, had one dressing room on one side of the building. The bad guys, known as the heels, had a dressing room on the other side of the building. Heels and baby faces didn't travel together. That was unheard of. And it was also that if you got into a bar fight as a wrestler, you better win it or else your ass was going to get fired. So, you know, my whole focal point with living on the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, was all I ever got to see was the WWWF. And, you know, you got magazines, which, you know, you read about other wrestlers here and there and the other thing. But basically, the WWF style was a big plotting style, you know, throw the punch, stamp the foot, whatever. But, you know, we thought it was real, on the up and stuff. And what broke that, in my mind, and what happened was that after the Garden shows, they would have they called them house shows. They would do colleges, high school gymnasiums, things like that, to raise money for fundraisers. The guy who ran the house shows was a wrestling legend, Gorilla Monsoon. So usually right after the garden shows, they'd go to like William Patterson College, Seton Hall University, Garfield High School, bunch of places. So what happened was, at one point, there was a tag team of Louis Cerdan and Tony Parisi. And I think they might have been working the Lumberjacks at the time, and in Madison Square Garden, they broke Louis Cerdan's leg. All right, well, 2 days later, on a Tuesday night, they got a wrestling card at Seton Hall, and the main event was Andre the Giant and Dominic DeNucci against Ernie Ladd and Bugsy McGraw. So we're going to go see this thing. So we buy tickets, but we get there and there's a line. And I said to my friend Jimmy, I said, go get the tickets, I'll park the truck. I had a van at the time. So I parked my van and this Toyota pulls up next to me. Out of the Toyota gets Andre the Giant. There was no front seat. He was driving from the back seat. All right, so this was cool. So we're in there. And guess who shows up in the second match? Louis Cerdan. That's who. So he never had his leg broken. This was way before dirt sheets, way before the internet. So you really never, had any idea what was really going on, because you weren't supposed to. That was the whole mystique of the whole thing. Nobody broke kayfabe. Actually, nobody broke it until Hacksaw Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik were busted for drinking and drugging in a car on the New Jersey Turnpike right after Vince Jr. took it over and made it big. But then I'm getting ahead of myself. But that's what basically broke kayfabe, in WWWF. Being that where I lived, and being that the WWF only ran shows from Maine to Maryland, when guys were working this area or were contracted to work in this area, they pretty much stayed in this area. So you would all, the weirdest thing was, I was doing a flea market in Rockaway in the parking lot, and I had this big mug rack that was about maybe 6 feet tall, because at that time I was selling coffee mugs. Well, I'm out there and I turn around, all of a sudden I see this guy standing by the mug rack looking at some stuff, and I go, holy shit, this is Blackjack Mulligan. So I walk over and I'm like, stuck out my hand, and he started backing away, and the reason was that because he was working as a heel against Andre the Giant. I'm like, no, I don't buy that. I think you're cool, this and that. So, we bullshitted for a little bit, and he went shopping, and that was it. Another one that ran into the area, Adrian Adonis was going out with some chick in Lyndhurst and was going to afternoon bingo with her down at the Parish Hall. Driving down the New Jersey Turnpike one day in my van, I'm looking down and there's a Volvo next to me, and sitting in the Volvo is Captain Lou Albano and Fred Blassie. One of the weirder things that happened was I had an apartment over a drugstore that was on a main drag in Rutherford, New Jersey. Now, being that this upstairs, it was kind of hard to find a place to park during the week, so I did my grocery shopping, on weekends. So I was living with my girlfriend, Ann, at the time, and we went to go grocery shopping. I went to pull into this space in front of the entrance to my apartment, and this car with South Carolina plates cuts me off and pulls into the space. And I'm like, you son of a bitch. I get out of the car, and I'm ready to fucking have it out with this guy. And I see this guy get out of the car, and I've been drinking all night, so I'm pretty hungover, and I wasn't registering who it was. And this guy's staring me down, and my girlfriend's yelling, get away from that. That guy's Swede Hansen. Wrestling, Saturday night, it's Swede Hansen. Swede was another killer heel that they had just brought in. So I backed off real quick when I saw it was Swede Hansen. Now, the thing was, we would go to all these shows, and, like I said, the house shows. There was a Polish wrestler wrestling, his name was Ivan Putski, who basically we thought sucked. Now, this was the time that they brought in The Rock's grandfather, High Chief Peter Maivia, who was actually a Samoan chief. And they had just turned him heel. Now, we go to see this show at Seton Hall. That's the main event, Putski against Maivia. So we're in the balcony, and we're smoking weed. We're all fucked up. And he comes out, and he thought, oh, Polish power. And we're like, fuck you, go back to Poland, you suck. So, we're really ragging on this guy, and we're cheering for the chief. So, Putski's getting pissed. He's looking up, and, we're drowning out everybody because, we're just drunk and loud and stuff. So, the next week goes by, the exact same card with the exact same matches is going to be at Garfield High School. And Garfield was primarily a Polish town. So again, we buy tickets, you know, it gets to the point, you know, where it's Myvia against Putski. Putski comes out, we go, yeah, you suck, it's us, blah, blah, blah. We keep on him. Well, that was the semi-main event. There was another one after that. Well, after that, he was standing in the doorway of the locker room looking daggers at us. And I'm like, you know, maybe we better slide out of here before, you know, right after the last match, because this guy looks like he's really, really pissed off. So, you know, he went to a bunch of them. We basically started, for whatever reason, cheering for the heels and booing the bad guys. We weren't the first guys to do this, but, you know, we just kept it up like that. Now, you didn't realize that there was other wrestling outside of the East Coast. And what happened was, one night I was fiddling around with my TV, because this is way before cable, too. You only had, like, 13 channels on the VHF stations, and you had a bunch of channels on this UHF station. And basically they were Spanish channels. The ones that you could get in were 47 and 41. Well, 11 o'clock, I think it was on a Tuesday night on 47, all of a sudden you got Championship Wrestling from Florida. And you had Dusty Rhodes, you had Frank the Hammer Goodish, who would become Bruiser Brody, King Curtis Iakea, the Funk Brothers, all these guys. And this was a lot different than what I had seen, because these guys seemed to be really beating the shit out of each other. You know, they would set things up at the end of the show. Okay, you just called me out, let's get in the ring and finish it. And the whole thing was, you know, they'd have TV time remaining, fight in the ring, and the whole deal was that they'd let it go, then go off the air. And the reason was, that was to get guys to go to the show that was going to be at the Eddie Graham Sportatorium in Orlando, Florida on a Sunday night. So everything was set up to get people to come to these house shows, which were all over Florida. So I was on my honeymoon, this is how nuts I was, and we saw the ad for wrestling, you know, at the Eddie Graham Sportatorium. So I said, you know, let's check this out, what the hell. So we drive down there. The Eddie Graham Sportatorium was this big aluminum barn-like structure. And we went in and they said, oh, you're from out of state? We'll give you ringside tickets. Well, close to ringside as we could for like $3. Compared to what was going on with the WWWF, this was the best show I ever saw. Blackjack was there, Kevin Sullivan, Joe LeDuc, Outlaw Ron Bass, Dusty, Barry Windham, Mike Rotundo, all these guys that would, you know, eventually wind up in the WWE down the road and become superstars. But it was a great show, you know, there was brawling, there was blood, there was all kinds of wild stuff. So every time we were in Florida, and the one time we went down there, I was a huge Road Warriors fan, because we were getting Championship Wrestling from Georgia once we got cable on the Turner Network. So I was a huge Road Warriors fan. It was the Road Warriors against Kevin Sullivan and Maka Singh, who used to be Bob Roop, an Olympic wrestler. So we got tickets, we went down there, and it was like, okay, the same cool stuff, except we didn't know, you know, the backstage stories that were going on. And Kevin Sullivan was huge down there because he had this stable of heels. He had Bob Roop, Maka Singh, Mark Lewin, the Purple Haze, Luna Vachon, who was Crazy Luna, and they were doing all kinds of crazy stuff.